Morning, everyone. This is John Shaw, the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Thanks for joining another installment of our series, Understanding Our New World. Today, we're utterly delighted to be joined by Dr. Fanta Aw, who is the executive director of an important group called the National Association of Foreign Student Advisors, often referred to by its acronym NAFSA, and also Association of International Educators. So it's a very interesting group, and Fanta is very interesting. She grew up in West Africa, in Mali, spent some time there and also Liberia, came to the United States, studied at American University in Washington, D.C., and has degrees, undergraduate in accounting, a graduate degree in public administration, and doctorate in sociology. Had a really distinguished career at AU, American University, including as vice president of undergraduate enrollment, campus life, and inclusive excellence. She has been a member of NAFSA since 1996, has been a president and board chair, and then last year became the executive director and is doing some really important things, executive director and CEO. So we have lots of things to talk about. They actually had just a wonderful conference last week, I believe it was, in New Orleans. So we want to hear what was going on there. But I look forward to a really terrific conversation. So Fanta, good morning.
Good morning, John. Good morning. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Well, I've seen you in an interview talk about your early years in Mali and then growing up in, I think, spent some time in Liberia, and you call yourself a global nomad. Talk a little bit about your early years and sort of the effect that had in terms of your subsequent professional development.
Yeah, no. So I grew up in Mali until the age of 7. And then due to some political reasons and also my father's occupation, we moved to Liberia. He was working with the UN. So I often say, I'm your typical global nomad, or what we call third culture kid, now third culture adult, in that I've grown up outside of my home countries during my formative years, went through the French educational system until I graduated from high school, and then I changed to the American system. And for those who are global nomads or third culture kids, the literature talks about the fact that we have an orientation to the world that may be a little bit different, in that you feel at home everywhere and at home nowhere is one of the attributes of global nomads. And also global nomads, really, we kind of tend to think about things in a very intercultural way. So I often say to people, when I look at a world map, I'm not just seeing countries and names of countries. I often can imagine and know people who may be in those parts of the world. And I just have a innate curiosity for understanding more about the world and the interconnectedness of the world. And those are typical attributes of global nomad. It's about adaptability. It's about, understanding that change is an ever-present part of our experience, and really wanting to understand people really fundamentally, and wanting to engage with people who are different from us and not see them as a threat, but rather as folks who in many ways can broaden our perspective and can enrich our experiences as well. So that's a little bit about me. I often say that I'm the product of international education, very much so since the age of 7.
Okay, great. Well, and how did you come to American University? And tell us a little bit about both what attracted you to AU and your academic career, because it's really interesting. You studied, I think, sociology, public administration, accounting first, and then public administration, sociology. So what is sort of the through line in those what seem to be very different disciplines?
Yeah, no. First of all, I came to American University because during my formative years, I had lived in Washington and went to the French International School here in Bethesda from the age of 12 until I was 17. So I knew that after finishing up the French school, that I wanted to come to the U.S. One, because of the sheer diversity of higher education, opportunities here in the U.S., and also was deeply attracted to the notion of experiential learning, understanding that it is really learning by doing, and the fact that you could apply theory to practice was a very much part of what I was seeking. Landed at American University because I knew it was a very global university in a place like Washington, D.C. That's an incredible city. And so I had found out from a friend that their sister had attended American, found out more about American, knew that it was a very global university. And so that attracted me, given my own previous experiences. And I studied accounting, again, something that's typical of global nomads, third culture kids. I wanted a career that could take me internationally. And I figured accounting, finance, business would be that field that would allow me to continue to live abroad, would allow me to live in different parts of the world with skills that would be transferable. Loved accounting. I found a professor who really made me passionate about accounting, worked as an auditor, and in the process realized this is not exactly what I want to do for the rest of my career. And again, the beauty of the US educational system is that you can actually major in one thing in your undergrad and you can pivot to another thing in your graduate. So I figure since I have a background in business administration, why not have one in public administration so I can understand how various type of institutions work. Went back to American University because I knew that they had a very strong program in public administration. And so went into the public administration program with a focus in organizational development. I wanted to understand how organizations function and loved, the courses that I took and the ability to really get immersed in that area of work. But in my first semester as an undergraduate student, as part of a liberal arts education, which is again another strength of the US system, I'd taken a sociology class. And I remember how much I loved the sociology course. And so when I finished my master's and I was now working at the university, I thought, you know what, I'm going to be that perpetual student. And I'm going to be that, sort of the lifelong learning sort of student. And I, started to look at PhD programs, and sociology just made a lot of sense because sociology is really about understanding institutions, but really about understanding systems and practices and human behavior. And I thought, what a perfect combination of my international education that is about cross-cultural, intercultural, having a background in business that really helps me understand how things function from a business paradigm, but also a public policy background tied with sociology. I felt that those were really the perfect kind of skill sets that would allow me to work in any sector and be able to bring to bear those different sort of knowledge and skills. And that's really what led me to do my doctorate in sociology. And with my doctorate, my focus was on political economy and international students. So I did an analysis of looking at international students in the US from post-World War II all the way to post-9/11. And my study really looked at how the US, in having international students, it helped the US build national civilizations. And so did my study on that and really got immersed into that area of work. And it felt like the right alignment. And American University was just the right place for me, both on an academic level or personal level in terms of personal development, and then also professionally in terms of the career that I was able to have for 32 years at American University.
Well, tell us about your time at AU then. I mean, it's a beautiful campus, really impressive school. I've met tremendous professors and students from AU. Talk about, I mean, did you start out just sort of kind of an entry-level job and just continue to work your way up? I know you became a vice president. Yeah, obviously we're studying for a PhD as well.
Yeah.
So tell us about your American University journey.
Sure. So when I came out of American University as an international student, I was very passionate about getting engaged and getting involved. And so I was a student leader within the International Student Association. So started working very closely with the International Student Scholar Services Office as a volunteer. And then from a volunteer, it turned into a part-time sort of job to help international students sort of, adjust to life in the United States by providing them with orientation, information, and just making sure that they felt welcome. And that turned into a part-time job during my graduate studies. And then from a part-time job, it turned into a full-time job. I had literally every role you can imagine, John, from starting at the front desk of the International Student Office, welcoming other international students because I could relate to their experiences, to then getting involved in the programmatic arm of it, and then started to take on more of a managerial role, and then became the director of that operation for about 17 years and helping to build programs and initiatives, and particularly really working very closely with faculty on how we could internationalize the university. And I would say every 2 or 3 years, I would be called upon to take on a different role or an additional role. So from there, went into more of the multicultural area, the student engagement work. So I was assistant vice president for 10 years in charge of student engagement. And then from there, moved on to become the interim vice president for campus life. And from there, move on to enrollment and to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I was involved in crafting the first strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion for the university in 2018, 2019, and then took on that role and responsibility. And by the time I left the university, had responsibility for undergraduate enrollment, our diversity and inclusion portfolio, and the student engagement. Things that, again, were aligned because it is about the student experience and how do we ensure that we create an environment for students to thrive and to succeed, and making sure that all of the different parts of services and programs come together, placing students at the center of that. Wonderful experience. It was an honor to serve my alma mater for the time that I did, for those, for those 32 years. And as you said, it's a beautiful campus. I got to know the students, the families, the faculty, and I was also a faculty in the School of International Service as a senior Hearst professorial lecturer for over a decade plus, where I was teaching at the graduate level courses in managing international intercultural programs, transnational education, etc. So we're multiple hat. The student hat, the faculty had, the staff had, and the administrator had. So it gave me a sense of the campus and how campus really function and how they sort of come together to really, again, place students at the center of learning and growth and education.
Well, so tell us about how you initially connected with NAFSA, because I know you've been a member since I think '96. And if you were just sort of a member and then transitioned to, I know you became a board chair and then now executive director. So I guess two parts of it. One, tell us a little bit about how you connected with NAFSA, and also let's tell us a little bit about your group. I mean, it celebrated its 75th anniversary, has some 10,000 members, and I think in 150 countries. So just tell us about NAFSA.
Sure. So, when I came into the field and started working in the International Student Office, I was told you have to know NAFSA because it's the professional association for standard setting within our field. And I remember becoming a member of NAFSA in 94, 95. So I've been a member for over 24 years with NAFSA. And I was, connected to NAFSA because of the professional development that it provides. And it is known within our field for its role in international education. So that's how I became involved. And NAFSA is split into regions. We have 11 regions. And I happen to belong to Region 8, which was the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, etc. So I was able to present at sessions, was able to really network with the community, got mentored by folks who had been in the field for a long time, who really were, standard bearers in the field. So it was the go-to association for anyone who has an interest in international education. And so that's how I became involved. And NAFSA functions with member leaders and function with volunteer leaders. So I was one of those volunteer leaders over a period of time. And then 9/11 happened. And I would say that was a watershed moment in US history for a lot of myriad of reasons. And with 9/11, I saw, sort of the rhetoric that was taking place about international students in the US. And as a former international student, it's something that I could see coming. And I felt that we really needed to shift the narrative because the narrative simply was not accurate and it was woefully problematic. So I was doing interviews with organizations like CNN, WAMU, NPR, and several others. And NAFSA had heard some of my interviews and they reached out and say, hey, we've been working on public policy and we think your orientation to this issue could really be helpful to us. Would you be willing in just, sitting down with us and talking through some of that? I said, absolutely. I went back to volunteering with NAFSA. I was invited to consider the board initially because I was working on my PhD. It wasn't the right timing, but then came back again and I said, yes, this is the right timing. And so I became a member of the board of directors. And over that period of time, the organization was going through transition. I was elected as chair and president of the board for 2 terms, so 4 years. So I often say NAFSA has been truly my professional home. It is really where I found in many ways my passion and my voice. And it's also really the association that connected me to the field writ large. So it is really an organization that is near and dear because it has been part of my journey for over 2 decades. And as an association, we're over 11,000 members from 150 plus countries. We cover the breadth of the field of international education, everything from education abroad to international student scholars, to teaching, learning, and scholarship, international education leadership, international enrollment management. So we're the only association of its kind that has the breadth and the depth of the field. And we're the largest and most comprehensive association. And we just celebrated this past May, John, our 76th anniversary. So we've been around for a while. And I often say the mainstay of this organization has been its members, passionate members who are doing incredible work at their various institutions and who really, we believe that international education is a path to a better, productive and peaceful world, and that international education is absolutely necessary in a globalized economy, and that our students, our institutions benefit from an international education. That's really the premise from which we come. And we are also very steeped in public policy work. We do a lot of public policy work in the US because we believe that having policies that are welcoming to international students, but more importantly, policies that facilitate the mobility of US students to go abroad is really key and essential for the U.S. standing in the world, the U.S. position in the world, for sort of, foreign policy, economic development, and so forth.
I know one of your themes is called connecting people, changing the world. So I
Yes.
think that sort of signals what you believe the impact of international education is. And let's maybe go there. Why is international education important? What is its value, both for individual people and the broader global community?
Well, there's been data that has shown that when people are able to have intercultural exchanges, what it does is that it really brings them closer, and it allows for cross-cultural competency and intercultural competency that is very much needed. So from where we sit, this ability to connect people across borders is necessary for both the value of exchange, but also really important for how we understand each other, develop relationships that are authentic relationship of respect with each other, that allows to facilitate trade, allows to facilitate foreign policy, allows to facilitate discovery and research and so forth. If you think about it, right, most of the major discoveries have been cross-border research that's allowed for that. When you think about, foreign policy and foreign policy role within the world, our ability to understand the other allows us in many ways to build bridges. And these are built bridges that are long-standing bridges. They're not just temporary bridges. It allows for trust to be built and for mutual understanding that then allows for much greater sort of exchanges of ideas and innovation. That's what we believe, and we've seen it work again and again. I can, give examples of students from Korea who came and studied in the US. It is not by accident that US-Korea relations have been as strong. There's been generations of students who benefited from a US education, went back as global ambassadors for the United States. That matters tremendously, in the way in which we think about geopolitics, in the way in which we think about mutual understanding and economic sort of growth and so forth. That's a very important part of it. So that's one of the reasons we talk about, in connecting people, it's a way of connecting to the world. And today, there are no issues that are, confined within borders. They're cross-border. Climate change, migration and displacement, you name all of the major global challenges that we confront, we're not going to be able to solve them on our own and by one nation state. It has to be multilateral relations. It has to be relations across borders and problem solving across borders. The pandemic was a perfect example of something that took the world, by storm, and we couldn't solve it. We couldn't contain it into one border. And that's why, intercultural exchange and exchange of people to people is absolutely essential. And the earlier students can be exposed to that, the better it is. It's also, there's good data that shows that students who've had an intercultural exchange are often going to be more adaptable, have better problem solving skills, and frankly, are more civically engaged. And I don't have to tell you, John, given the polarization that we confront today, we need more civically engaged folks who really believe in the value of civil discourse, who believe in seeing the other, in ways that are humanistic. And so that's another reason why we do the work that we do. And our members do that throughout institutions, not just in the US, but across the world.
Yeah, I'll just say from my own personal experience as an undergrad, I spent a semester in London and Florence, and it was very impactful. Then as a graduate student, I spent a year and a half in Australia and on a Rotary fellowship, and had
Wow.
a wonderful time and developed this deep interest in Australia that has persisted throughout my life. I've been back 4 or 5 times. I still have Australian friends, and it just, it just to me has showed how an experience like that just developed really kind of a lifelong connection to a place.
And John, you're a perfect example of the testament of this, right? When you've had those experiences, you see things differently. Whenever someone is talking about Australia, you have the benefit of much more nuanced perspective, much more comprehensive perspective, perhaps, than someone who's just reading a newspaper and is learning about Australia through a newspaper. And so the ability to sort of see the world through different lens is critically important in building bridges. And I think you're a perfect example of that with your study abroad in London and then graduate studies being able to go to Australia.
Yeah, very much. Well, I was really struck by a program, I think the State Department and Department of Education, there's an International Education Week that they have each year. And they issued a statement. I just want to read a couple sentences because I think it plays on some of the themes you're talking about. They're focusing here on just leadership development. They say the robust exchange of students, researchers, scholars, and educators, along with broader international education efforts between the US and other countries, strengthens relationships between current and future leaders. These relationships are necessary to address shared challenges, enhance American prosperity, and contribute to global peace and security. Maybe talk about that concept and also just what the State Department and the Department of Education are doing to kind of solidify this concept of international education in the U.S.
Yeah, no, I think the State Department, the statement from the State Department and the Department of Education really does a great job of summarizing why international education is so valuable, and the mechanisms that we need to do more of that. By and large, the State Department has multiple programs to facilitate study abroad, whether it's the Gilman, the Fulbright. There's so many programs that they've had over the myriad of years and that have left generations of students who benefited from that. And they continue to also have, short-term exchanges for younger students to come. And now they even have intercultural exchange for those who are in the arts, because we know that arts is a powerful tool for communication across cultures and so forth. So they've been working very hard to make sure that mobility happens and investing resources through congressional budget to do so. By the same token, the Department of Education also has been very intent on making sure that education, particularly foreign languages, in US high schools and others are continued to be valued, because the ability to speak another language, the ability to communicate cross-culturally becomes very, very important. So they've been teaming up on those things, and they've been providing some grants for institutions to do more of the promotion of education abroad, of facilitating mobility of teachers. In the Department of Education case, they've brought, teachers from Egypt and all over to come and learn about pedagogical practices in the US that can strengthen their teaching capacities back at home. So those have been some of the work that's happened among our different government agencies. But for us, to be honest with you, John, given what we've seen study abroad, the numbers are not where they need to be, right? I mean, we are recovering from post-pandemic, but we have less than 200,000 students based on the IE data that are studying abroad. That's less than 1% of total enrollment at US universities. That tells you how much work we need to have. And about 10% of those who graduate from our US institutions have had a study abroad experience. It has to be significantly more. Given globalization, given our interdependencies of our economies, given foreign policy and foreign relations, given all of the things that we've talked about, it is vitally important for many, many more US students to find themselves studying abroad. It's not nice to have, we would say it's actually a necessity. And there's a sense of urgency around that, because by not having students who are really oriented to seeing the world writ large, it limits their potential and it limits their possibilities. I was looking at just recent data and I was struck by the fact that, about 39 million jobs, in the US are tied to international trade. That alone. And I've said, the global has become local. You can be anywhere, pick anywhere on the map, whether it's a remote town in Alabama or anywhere else, you will see that there is an international presence with global corporations, with entities, with so much work that's happening. And our US students are not exposed enough to that. And I think that that is really at our detriment. And so that's the work that we're really focused on. The State Department is doing its part. The Department of Education is doing its part, but we know that it is really right now, it still is a drop in the bucket when you see the data. And that's the work that we're absolutely focused on. We have to have many, many more students. And we also need to make sure that the students who are going are really reflective of the United States, the diversity of students, the diversity of institutions that are sending students, so that it cannot be just a few. When I was at American University, close to 70% of our undergraduate students studied abroad. But that is the exception and not the norm, right? So how do we make sure that this is really how do we democratize study abroad? I think is a big part of it. And this is where, again, that's really our primary focus from a public policy perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I really want to drill down on a couple of the numbers because there's a survey that I've seen you refer to in some of your talks by Open Doors.
Mhm.
And I just want to walk through some of the numbers because they're really striking, and I think it might help our viewers get a sense of the broader
Mhm.
context. But this is in 2023, there were about 1 million international students in US colleges and universities. You know,
Mhm.
they tended to go to the states you might expect: California, New York, Texas, Massachusetts, Illinois included. The thing that was striking and is about half of all the international students are from either China or India. In fact,
Yeah.
that survey said 27% are from China, 25% from India, and then
Yeah.
the next largest one is South Korea with 4%.
Yeah.
Now, let's stipulate that China and India are both, countries with 1 billion people, so they make up a quarter of humanity. But talk about that. Just the international students that come to U.S. And let me just finally add, the survey also talks about the financing, and that really struck me as really powerful because a very heavy percentage of these students come from family funds. A relatively small percentage, they get some help from the colleges and universities, employers, but government assistance is very, very low, much lower than I would have anticipated. So a lot of things on the table, but just number of international students in the US, how they're funded, and where they're studying.
No, great questions all around. Yes, as you said, we have over 1 million international students who are studying in the US. We're bouncing back from pre-pandemic. We're not at the pre-pandemic level, but we're getting there, which is good news for the United States. But as you also pointed out, the diversity of the students who are coming is somewhat limited, right? The bulk of them, China and India, big countries, tremendous population size, and also have an orientation to an international education. And then you see the numbers sort of drop. So the same way we want to see education abroad be diversified, likewise, we want to see international education diversified for international students. We know from research after research that when we've asked students, if you had a choice of destinations for studying, where would it be? The United States comes on top consistently. So we know that there's a strong desire on the part of international students to come to the US. But as you also cited, the main funding source for international students are families. So these have to be really upper middle class to really the elite of the elite are the ones who can afford a US education. It therefore leaves behind a tremendous number of students with great desire and tremendous talent who will never make their way to the United States. So we need to also make sure that students are aware of community colleges, our state institutions, and others that provide superb education, and not only the very few that are sort of what you call your top, institution within U.S. World and News Report. So we need to make sure that people are aware of the diversity and the breadth of education opportunities in the U.S. And also, for those who are able to come, cost is a major impediment. The cost of a U.S. education is among the highest in the world. Compared to everywhere else, we're significantly more pricey, and that's a barrier for international students to come. Interesting enough, it's also a barrier for US students to go abroad. Whenever we survey US students who are going abroad, they tell us about 80+% tell us that cost is one of the barriers. So cost is a barrier for both sides of this. So that's one aspect of it. And so funding is very much not diversified, like you said. You would think that there would be more funding on the part of universities and others, but many institutions look to international students as one way, particularly as there's been defunding of public institutions. They see international students as a way to make up for that. We put together every year an economic indicator of the contribution of international students. And the latest data that we put together basically shows that international students contributed $41.1 billion and supported 363 jobs in the US economy in 2022-23. That is not insignificant. In addition to their contributions with the knowledge that they bring, it is also the economic contributions and the job creations that they're able to make. And another statistic, John, that I think is important for your readers to be aware of is that literally 1 in 4 startups in the US were started by former international students. That is not insignificant. And if you start looking at AI and what has happened in terms of innovation, much of it has happened from former international students or immigrants. So that's the breadth of contribution when it comes to innovation, to contributions to the U.S. economy and knowledge production.
Right. In that same survey, they note that many of the international students study computer science,
STEM.
engineering, and business. Yeah, that
Absolutely.
Fine, let's dig down, pardon me, a little bit on the U.S. students going abroad.
Mm-hmm.
As you pointed out earlier, I mean, I was really struck by how low the number is. The number I saw was 189,000.
Yeah.
And almost 3/4 go to Western Europe, Italy, the UK, Spain, France, Ireland. I mean, wonderful, amazing countries. So it's not hard to see what the allure is. And as someone who went to both Italy and England, I can attest to that. So talk about the U.S. students going abroad. And I mean, we've talked about the barriers. Cost, of course, is one. But for a country of 350 million, to have only 200,000 students going abroad, and many of them are just summer programs, which is not to be critical of that, but it's a more limited experience. So talk about the challenge to get more Americans. And let me just point this out. I know there's a few schools, not many, I think Goucher in Maryland, that actually has a requirement that students spend at least a semester or part of a year overseas. So a lot on the table there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The numbers are very, very minuscule, and we have to do so much more on that front, as you've pointed out. And definitely, we know that cost is a barrier, but other barriers include like majors. The majors that they're in, and the transferability of credits. Those are also impediments to students being able to study abroad. So our institutions have to become much more nimble in the recognition of credits, the recognition of transfers of credits, and so forth, in addition to facilitating ways to kind of deal with the with the cost structure of it. And then there's also, I think, a bigger piece, John, that we don't often talk about. And that is that we all need to do a much better job of making the case to students and to others why an education abroad is necessary today. In addition to the knowledge and skills that I've just talked about, and the fact that it really does create more civically engaged students, the ability to function in a way with the intercultural competence that is needed in a global economy, study abroad provides the perfect avenue to be able to acquire those. It really does make a difference in so many levels. And so, yes, we have very few that are going, and they're going to a very small number of countries. We've got to increase the numbers significantly, and we also have to diversify where they're going. It's a big world out there, and there are growing economies everywhere. I don't have to tell you, Africa has some of the fastest growing economy as we're looking at it. India is a major player now in ways that perhaps, many years ago, it wasn't seen as much. There is a need for our students to go beyond Europe and to really immerse themselves in other cultures, understand the politics of other parts of the world, learn additional languages to really function in the way in which they need to function in order for this country to continue to be as competitive as it can. And this is where, from our standpoint, the Senator Paul Simon Study Abroad Act really is essential to that, absolutely essential.
Well, I was ready to go there. Well, actually, before I go there, I want to talk about an award you have, which is the Paul Simon Campus Internationalization Award. And I know our good friend Martin Simon is a huge supporter and champion of this program. He loves it. He's really proud of it. And I think there's actually two kind of awards. One is the Comprehensive Award, and then the Spotlight Award. So tell us about this Paul Simon Award for Campus Internationalization.
Yeah, no. So the Senator's Paul Simon Award is really a very special award because we were able to put it in place in 2003, and it's named after the late Senator Paul Simon because of his legacy and his championing of international education. We were fortunate to find, in Senator Paul Simon, a champion, a friend of international education who really lived out in beautiful ways what's the promise of this field. So the award was named after him, and it's really about helping our institutions to make sure that our institution really, have broadly as part of their fabric international education, that it becomes a central component of it. And we've been fortunate since its inception. We have received over 774 nominations from 460 institutions. And we've had 101 awards and 77 spotlight awards. So the comprehensive award are for those who really have infused in the fabric of the institution throughout in its teaching, its research, and its programs, internationalization. The Spotlight Awards goes to institutions that have really a flagship program that has been identified as really a model program. So we want to recognize both, individual programs that are taking place at institutions, as well as a comprehensive approach to international education. And what I have seen, because we just gave out the award, is the breadth of institutions, everything from HBCUs to community colleges to to public to private. And as a matter of fact, I will say that including minority serving institutions, and Northwestern, which is in the state that you all are in, has been the only institution that has been recognized 3 times. And we've had 5 other Illinois colleges and universities that have won the Simon Award. So Illinois, you're really doing some good work there. Continue the great work. But that's just an illustration of what has taken place. And we recognize them. And it's also a way for institutions to be able to share best practices with each other and to inspire others that this is not only possible, but that it is very doable at the scale that it needs to be done. And presidents often will create a video as part of the recognition of the award to speak about what this means for their campus. So this is something that is seen at the highest level of the institution of being of value. And that's an important component. We know that leadership is necessary for these types of recognition and award.
Well, and the other thing that you had mentioned just a minute ago was the Paul Simon Study Abroad Act, which I know is very dear to Senator Simon's heart. I mean, his son Martin has worked on it very hard. Our senior senator from Illinois, Richard Durbin, is working with the senator from Mississippi, Roger Wicker, on this. So tell us about that, and particularly, and I want you to focus on a couple of the aspects or some of the goals of it, which is exactly what you're saying, to get, to get, maybe first generation students overseas, minority students, and also to have them go to places other than, these wonderful spots in Northwest Europe that are, kind of garden places, but give a more limited view of the world. So if you could tell us about the Paul Simon Study Abroad Act and why it's important.
Yeah, no. So again, the late Senator Paul Simon was an incredible champion. I mean, his commitment to international education is really quite remarkable. And so we believe that what this act would do is really remove the institutional, curricular, and financial barriers for students to be able to go study abroad, because we know that those are the 3 components that are critical barriers to studying abroad: the financial, the institutional, and the curricular. And so what is being proposed is that by enacting into law a competitive grant program, it's currently housed under the Department of State. And the grant program under the Department of State is called the IDEAS program, and it stands for Increase and Diversify Education Abroad for U.S. Students. So we're asking for funding to really be directed there and to increase that funding substantially to allow many more students to go abroad. And that in allowing many more students to go abroad, that a condition of that is diversification of students and diversification of institution, as well as diversification of where students are going to study abroad, so that we can cover a larger swath. We can make sure that we have also more students represented in study abroad and more institutions represented in study abroad. And I will say that Senator, Dick Durbin introduced a bill with Senator Roger Wicker. So this was a bipartisan bill in the Senate, and also Representative Brad Schneider of Illinois joined with Representative Brian Fitzpatrick to introduce the bill in the House. So we know that there's bipartisan support for this bill. Both sides of the aisle understand that this is good for the United States, it's good for our higher education institutions, and it's good for our young people to be exposed to that. And we were very pleased when we had the conference last year, the NAFSA conference last year here in Washington, D.C. We were able to meet with Senator Durbin, and he declared a year ago that at NAFSA public policy briefing, his intent to enact the bill this Congress. And I will say, as someone who was mentored by Senator Simon, this would be a lasting tribute to his memory, to his mentor, and it would really make a significant difference in the lives and career readiness of U.S. colleges and students. This would go a very long way in positioning our young people for the world that is today and the world that is to come. So we are very excited about that. And the Simon family have been incredibly supportive on so many levels. So we are very optimistic about this bill. And that's why we've been really, this is one of our major public policy agenda, as you can imagine. And we're really optimistic about that. And we thank Senator Durbin and all of the others who have really been pushing for this. It's necessary because, John, I look at the world and I see so much coming at us, and our ability to have our young people become the leaders of tomorrow, and the investment we make in the young leaders of tomorrow is going to be the best investment for our nation.
But I've seen you in interviews say that you think international education is at what you've called an inflection point, a pivot point.
Yeah.
Explain what that means, and also explain some things you've said about the need for an American national strategic plan for international education.
Yeah.
Why is that needed as opposed to just a university by university, college by college effort? What would you hope to get from a strategic plan?
Yeah. So let me speak about the national strategy and why I think we're at an inflection point. We at NAFSA have worked with a coalition, and we're now a coalition of 40 organizations that have come together to create the U.S. for Success Coalition. And the aim of the coalition is to really work hand in hand with government partners to really move toward a U.S. national strategy for international education. Right now, it's too ad hoc, whereas other nations have had really very robust strategies for international education, and it is coming from their government. We're so decentralized. You know, Department of Education has some component. The Department of Commerce has some component. The Department of State has another component, and then we have, our Homeland Security and so forth. It is very decentralized, and we need a coordinated strategy around this that's really going to position the United States as a destination of choice for international students coming from around the world. That is vitally important for us because there is increased competition for international students all around the world. Just look at Japan, South Korea, Vietnam. They've all continued to announce national strategies for international education. So this coalition has come together to really be that voice and to be that coordinated arm for this area of work. The reason, John, this is important is because we have seen over the decades the erosion of the U.S. share of international students coming, right? I remember once upon a time when it was hovering around 20 or so percent. Now it's around 12, 13%. And we cannot take for granted that international students are going to continue to come to the United States. There are so many barriers to their entry around visa processing, around pathways to employment, so many things, whereas other countries have understood how critical this is to their economy and to just their place and standing in the world. So this is why we're at an inflection point, because receiving countries like the United States, the UK, Canada and Australia that have enjoyed a land share of international students for a long period of time, that is shifting now. We're seeing sending countries that are becoming receiving countries. Countries like Vietnam, countries like Bangladesh and others are going to be looking to how they can have more international students come to their country. India is very much looking at how they can do more of that. China, they've all talked about how international education is an important component of their foreign policy goal. And we have yet to really make the pronouncement that we need, but not just a pronouncement. We have to work actively toward that. And the coalition work is to really help with that. Because I'm concerned that by not having a national strategy and by not having more students study abroad, the U.S. is going to distance itself and isolate itself from the rest of the world.
Well, Fanta,
that would be a good thing.
That's a really important point because we've actually had a couple of questions emailed in that get to that. One of them is, the question says, is the U.S. closer to establishing a national recruitment strategy to retain international students who stopped choosing the U.S. as their academic destination after 2017? These students have been choosing countries like Canada and Australia ever since. I mean, how would you respond to that? Are we closer to a national strategy?
I think we're working toward it. I wouldn't say that we're that close, but I know that there hasn't been a time during the 30 plus years that I've been in international education where we've had more of a coordination around that. So there's definitely more of a coordinated effort. There are more people who've come together to really try to work on this. And so this is our best shot at really getting as close as we can to a national strategy. And it is very much needed because it is not only getting students here, but also for those students who wish to contribute, giving them pathways to do so. And for those students who then go back home, continue to engage those students while they're back home. So, John, we have ways to go, but we are closer than we've ever been because we have a coordinated effort now. And through the coalition, working hand in hand with government, I'm more optimistic now than I've been.
And we actually got a terrific question from SIU Center for International Education, which begins by thanking you for your great work. And it's asked, they say, the question is, what are the most actionable items that higher education administrators should now be working on for international education? And we've talked about some of the legislation that's pending, but what are the actionable items for international education administrators?
Yeah, no, so some of the most actionable items is they really do need to do an audit of their campus communities about their readiness for internationalization. And there are lots of different roadmaps for how you get there, but that's very actionable. How is your campus showing up for international education and for internationalization, right? What's the skill set of your faculty pedagogically? What are the areas of research that you're engaged with? What does it look like in terms of the demographic of your student body that is coming to the US and your students who are going overseas? So that's one concrete items that I think our universities and administrators in particular could do. The second piece concretely that I think our administrators can do is also to get engaged with public policy work and advocacy work at the state level significantly, because our state are critical players in the international education work. And so their ability to make sure that they're in touch with their senators, with their representatives and others is quite important, John, and to tell the stories of why international education is important. Provide the data for your campus, provide the stories of success that's happened so that our senators are really in many ways have the tools and have the information they need to understand why promoting international education is important. Concretely, they can therefore, in working with their senators and others and reps, really push for the Simon bill. We need as much help as we can get, and we need as much advocacy as we can get with the Simon bill. That's another concrete item. And then lastly, make sure that the students who are on your campuses, that are international students, that they're really thriving, that they're coming, that they're thriving on your campuses, that they're graduating, and that the pathways are open to them. Those are concrete things that I would say can take place on our respective campuses. We are fortunate to have members who are very dedicated to this, and I thank them really for the hard work that they do on a given day. And we look forward to continuing to partner with them as we move forward in this work and where we can go even further.
A couple of the questions that we received, I mean, raised maybe the elephant in the room, which is just how the political environment in the United States, which has become obviously very rancorous and polarized, how that discourages students from coming. And also, frankly, the gun shootings, the violence that, are images that, are prevalent on cable TV and really across the world, and has given many people a perception that, violence is just completely out of control in the US.
So, I mean, these are barriers, right? I mean, folks are looking out there and they're saying that, when it comes to issues of gun control, that in the US, we're not there. They're saying, they're concerned about issues of safety in, the areas that they're in. That's definitely is an issue for a lot of students. We hear particularly from international parents about their concerns, especially when it comes to undergraduate students, that's one of the top things, are safety issues that are there. And yet, John, even with that, our international students and their families have been able to see the strength of the US system and the strength of the US education system. The fact that we have world-class universities, the fact that there's groundbreaking research, the fact that we have multicultural communities where our students tend to go, and that we have a focus on strong liberal arts along with experiential, are things that families really privilege, while also understanding some of the barriers and risks which have to do with safety. We also often explain to families, this is a huge country, and there are lots and lots of places that your students have the ability to go to. So yes, ask all the right questions when you're making decisions, particularly around the issues that you're concerned about. And institutions have to be ready to provide accurate and timely information to students. But I would be, naive in not saying that things around, issues of, the perception of violence is something that certainly families worry about. But then also, John, we see that issues of violence are not unique to the United States, and families do understand that. And they really want their students to get the best education that they can afford, knowing that that is really the best investment in their students' future.
Great. Well, final question, Fanta, and I'd like to ask our guests, since we have some students on this, what career advice would you give them? What have you learned over your years? What would you tell your 22-year-old self about the path forward professionally? I mean, you're a self-professed global nomad, so I'm assuming there might be some international travel suggested, but what have you learned?
Well, what I have learned is that we have more in common than different. And you can only find that out when you really venture out. So the first thing I've learned is in order to grow, you have to stretch yourself. And in order to stretch yourself, travel and experiences in other parts of the world is a vital part of how you can grow and how you can stress yourself. You can stretch yourself. So that's lesson number one that I've learned. The second lesson that I've learned is that, again, one of the strengths of the US system is experiential education. And so I always say to every student, take full advantage of the opportunities that you're afforded, whether it's community-based learning, whether it's internships, it's volunteerism, and so forth. And don't limit your community-based learning or your volunteerism and or your internships to the United States. There are opportunities for you even outside of the US. And that even goes for international students. As a global nomad, yes, you can come to the US and study, but while you're here, nothing says that you can't go and do a study abroad in another parts of the world and really have that multicultural, multi-frame orientation to the work. I think that's one of the things that I have learned as we navigated. And then lastly, I've always said you're either part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And so often I think we live at a time because of depolarization and so forth. I think sometimes people may be a little bit pessimistic. And what I often say is if you're passionate and you believe in something, you have to basically, act. You have to do your part as a citizen of this world. And so civic engagement is a really important part of our obligation and social responsibility. And all of us have the ability to do a small part in that. And so particularly for this generation of students, we look to you as our future. And we have tremendous optimism for the future, but the future is now. The future is now.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Fanta, for just a terrific conversation, and keep up really the important work you're doing. I know us at the Institute are deeply grateful and supportive. Martin Simon, the chair of our board, is a passionate advocate for your group. He thinks you're doing really, really important, consequential work that reflect his father's life's, ambitions and work. So we all really applaud your hard work and look forward maybe to hosting you on campus sometime and bringing your message to the people of Southern Illinois.
I very much look forward to that. And Martin Simon and the entire family have been incredible champions. And we are NAFSA are very grateful to him and to the family for their support. And really also kudos to the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute for the important work that you do on an everyday basis. And I very much look forward to coming to campus and having a chance to really sort of visit with the center. But thank you for this opportunity. And we at NAFSA look forward to continue to work hand in hand with you all. And yes, we are very optimistic that the Senator Paul Simon bill is going to pass. We very much are optimistic about that.
Maybe we'll both be at the bill signing ceremony then.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much, Fanta.
Thank you. You have a wonderful day, John. Thanks again.
Thank you. And thanks to all you for watching another edition of our series. We're going to have this video on our website in the coming days. Please look at it, send it to family and friends. Thank you for supporting the Institute and keeping the memory of Paul Simon alive and well. Thanks so much.